Okay.
So Lydia, you get ready.
Digital inclusion. My name is Luc van Langenhoven. I'm the chair of this afternoon conference. So welcome everybody. We're going to spend the afternoon discussing the issue of inclusion, exclusion from a digital perspective. And you know, the dichotomy inclusion, exclusion is not a new one, but a new dimension is the digitalization and the effect it has on inclusion and exclusion. So as the first EUTOPIA Week is organized in Paris, together with our Paris colleagues, we are organizing this conference, and we bring together a number of specialists, including representatives from other European University Alliances. Very welcome to all of you to debate these issues. We will have a very strict and full schedule, so we will have to keep the time keeping very seriously. So I will be allocating a number of minutes to each of the speakers. And as I said before, I will be rather strict on that. But before we start with the list of invited speakers, I want to give the floor to my good colleague, Luciana Radut, who is the Vice President for EUTOPIA at Cergy. And she has a message for us from the Commissioner, Maria Gabriel. Luciana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Luc. Yes, I'm very happy to say to you that Commissioner Gabriel honored us with a letter specifically for this conference, as we all think that joining forces among our alliances is very important. And I will go quite fast, Luc. I know the time is not very long, but I think it's important for us to hear this letter. I also put some images there. It goes like this. I'm only quoting. Dear rectors and participants, I would like to congratulate you on the excellent idea to bring together all the key actors of the EUTOPIA Alliance, students, staff, local and regional authorities, to take stock of the results achieved so far and the objectives ahead. By coming together, you reinforce your common EUTOPIA identity. I also appreciate that you have associated representatives from ARCUS, Charm EU, Civis Alliance and Epicure Alliance to your conference on digital inclusion. European universities are the test beds for the universities of the future. Sharing experience is a way to refine your cooperation and further develop socially inclusive practices in digital education. The digital transition is a reality in the COVID-19 pandemic, has also accelerated the pace and scope of change. Digital connectivity, infrastructure and equipment, equal access to quality distance learning, digital skills and competencies have become indispensable for us to continue our daily lives despite the lockdown measures. The crisis has also shown that the existing socio-economic disparities in Europe are translating into a disturbing digital divide. I find it therefore very pertinent that you are focusing on the two sides of the coin, digital opportunities and digital inclusion. The two cannot be dissociated. As Commissioner for Innovation, Research, Culture, Education and Youth, I have made it my mission to ensure both excellence and inclusion in all our educational, research and innovation policies and programs. Deeper cooperation across borders, disciplines and culture is among the key prerequisites to achieve this, to recover from the crisis and to build resilience. The European universities can pave the way. A survey of the first 17 European University Alliances showed that 96% of the institutions involved think they would have been better prepared to face this pandemic if their European university had already been fully operational. It is reassuring that more than 60% are already well advanced and consider that being part of a European university has been helpful in addressing difficulties linked to the COVID-19 crisis. I encourage all European university alliances to share your innovative pedagogies with the wide European higher education community so that we can build up capacity and resilience across the EU. I would like to assure you that at European level, the Commission will continue to add value to guiding your work on digital inclusion. In September, I will propose an update of the Digital Education Action Plan, which will take into account the lessons learned from the previous plan and from the COVID-19 crisis. The upgrade will target formal education, including higher education, as well as non-formal and lifelong learning perspectives. To inform the new action plan, we have launched an open public consultation to hear from students, parents, educators, public authorities, and education institutions about their experiences. The consultation will be open until 4 September. I encourage you and your members to take part, share your experiences and your vision for the future. I would also like to assure you that the next Erasmus Plus program will continue to prioritize inclusive digitalization of higher education. Beyond the European Universities Initiative, I want to support every higher education institution in their step-by-step transformation. To enhance international cooperation, Erasmus Plus will support a wider choice of mobility formats, including blended mobility, virtual cooperation, combined with physical mobility once it becomes possible again. We must work all together to innovate and rethink education in Europe in the 21st century. I count on your support and look forward to hearing more about the results of your discussion. That was it.
Thank you very much, Luciana, and thanks to the Commissioner. I think that's very important for us to receive this kind of message and to have a dialogue with the European Commission in this regard. Which brings me immediately to the first speaker of this afternoon, which is Mr. Gudrun Stock, who is one of the deputy heads of units at DG Connect, and he will talk about the Web Accessibility Directive applied to higher education institutions. Mr. Stock, you have the floor. Hello. There we go.
Yes. Are you going to show the presentation? Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. First of all, welcome to all the participants to this presentation on the Web Accessibility Directive that will address more or less three aspects. And one, the first one is, does the Web Accessibility Directive apply to higher education institutions? The other one is how higher education institutions can get involved in supporting the implementation of the directive, and how higher education institutions can foster digital inclusion more in general. So could you move to the next slide, please? Or can I do it myself? No, I cannot hear it. So back, okay. So I will start with an outlook or a summary or brief introduction of what the Web Accessibility is. So it has a dual objective, the Web Accessibility Directive. One objective is to increase digital inclusion by ensuring that the websites of mobile applications and mobile applications of public sector bodies are more accessible to users, in particular to users with disabilities. And the other objective is to improve the functioning of the internal market. So, and this is both dimensions are very important. The digital inclusion dimension is important because in the digital transformation of public administrations, more and more public sector bodies throughout the EU offer their services and content online. And in the recent Corona crisis, of course, we have seen a really urgent need for accessible public health information, and also an urgent need in reducing barriers in accessing distance learning because of all the homeschooling and universities that have had to move their students back home to dispense their courses. So web accessibility of public sector websites and mobile applications is really of great importance to give persons with disabilities equal opportunities to make use of the services offered, and also to allow public sector bodies to live up to their core function, which is to be at everybody's service. And the internal market dimension is also relatively important because up to now, there are only some 10% of websites in Europe that are accessible. So there is really a significant growth potential in the European market for products and services related to web accessibility. And bringing down fragmentation will allow developers of such services and providers of such services to operate more easily across borders. So really, it's a triple win. By harmonizing the market through common accessibility requirements, we bring down market barriers and the cost for web accessibility solutions. We can create jobs and growth in that market. And ultimately, we'll have services and products online that are accessible to more users. So we move to the next slide, please. Spoke about the common accessibility requirements, which are important in the directive. So there are 4 of them that are set forth in the directive. They are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Perceivable means that information and user interface components, they cannot be invisible to all the senses of the user. It means, for instance, that text alternatives should be provided for images. And operable means that user interface components and also the navigation must be operable, so that they cannot require an interaction that the user cannot perform. So they may not make all functionality available from just a keyboard. Understandable means that both information and the operation of the user interface must be understandable for users. So for instance, they must help users avoid or correct mistakes that they may make on a website. And robust means that it must be possible for content to be interpreted reliably by a wide variety of user agents, including assistive technology. So a screen reader, for instance, must be possible to read the websites and the content on the websites with a screen reader. Under the directive, the Commission has commissioned harmonized standards that was adopted in 2018 and published in the official journal of the European Union. And if public sector bodies use this standard, it grants them presumption of conformity with the requirements of the directive. So the member states may go beyond the accessibility requirements that are set forth in the HEN, but the harmonized standard sets the minimum requirements. So next slide, please. So who is affected, or who is in the scope of the Web Accessibility Directive? In general, it's public sector bodies, but then there are certain types of public sector bodies which are exempted or not under the scope of the directive. So it does not apply to public service broadcasters, because there is sector-specific legislation. That's the Audiovisual Media Services Directive. And it also does not apply to NGOs, unless these NGOs provide services which are essential to the public or meant specifically for persons with disabilities. And then the directive provides that member states may exclude websites of school, kindergartens, or nurseries, except for the essential online administrative functions. So it must be possible to, for a person with a disability to enroll a child in the school on that website. That would be an essential administrative function. But the directive does not mention higher education institutions. They are not specifically mentioned in the directive. Next slide, please. So we have to dig a bit deeper in terms of whether it applies to higher education institutions or not. So how is the public sector body defined for the purposes of the Web Accessibility Directive? So they're all state, regional, or local authorities, or bodies governed by public law. And here there are a number of conditions that such bodies have to fulfill to fall within this scope. They have to have a legal personality, and they also have to be established to meet needs in the general interest, and they may not have an industrial or a commercial character. And in addition, they have to be predominantly financed by a public sector body or a body governed by public law, or they have to be subject to management supervision or governed by an administrative, managerial, or supervisory board, of which at least 50% of the members have been appointed by a public sector body or a body governed by public law. and also associations of such of public sector bodies or bodies governed by public law qualify as public sector bodies. So this slide is in sort of sense important because it depends on whether a higher education institution qualifies as a public sector body or a body governed by public law. And if that is the case, then the Web Accessibility Directive applies to that higher education institution. So next slide, please. So there are the scope. I spoke about the scope in terms of bodies that are covered, and now it's the scope in terms of the content and the services. So its scope is website and mobile apps. In general, it applies to website and mobile apps of public sector bodies, but certain content types are excluded and should be made available in an accessible manner on demand, but only where appropriate. So for different reasons, for instance, if it's old content, office files or pre-recorded time-based media, means videos or archives, or extranet and intranets, they are excluded. Or if it is difficult for reasons of feasibility or control. So if it's a live video or maps, mapping services or third-party content for which the public sector body may not have the intellectual property rights, or certain reproductions of items in heritage collections, they are also exempted. And then there is an exception for disproportionate burden. So if for financial or resource reasons, a public sector body cannot make accessible some content in an accessible manner, for justified and proportional reasons, they may not make that content accessible. So this is based on self-assessment, but it's also supervised by an enforcement body that's appointed in the member state for the Web Accessibility Directive, and it applies only to specific types of content and not to full websites or mobile apps. And in this regard, we can see that maybe digital educational resources or videos or services that are offered by higher education institutions, they could qualify as pre-recorded live time-based media, and that are made available on intranets or extranets, so they could possibly be excluded from the scope of the directive. So next slide. The situation is a bit complex, I understand that. But then this directive is a minimum harmonization directive. This means that member states may go beyond the requirements in the directive in their national transposing measures. And this is where the situation becomes even a bit more complex for higher education institutions. The fact that the member states may go beyond the basic requirements in the directive mean that they can extend the application to other types of websites and mobile apps. And here the directive mentions specifically intranet or extranet websites in education. So member states may choose to bring those types of websites under the scope of their national transposing measure. They may also not use content exclusions that are set forth in the directive, and this could refer to pre-recorded time-based media or video content. And they may also go beyond the minimum accessibility requirement defined in the in the harmonized European standard. So really the legal situation for higher education institutions may vary from member state to member state, and even within member states if it is a federal state like Belgium or Germany, depending on how the legislation has been transposed. So next slide, please, to make it a bit easier for a higher education institution to understand whether they are within the scope of the directive or not. Here's a sort of little checklist. So first of all, you'd have to check whether your university qualifies as a public sector body or a body governed by public law under the relevant national transposing measures or other national provisions, because universities may have some special legal status in different member states that also has to be taken into account. And if they are covered, or if they qualify as such a public sector body or body governed by public law, you would also have to check in the national transposing legislation that applies to the university whether video-based educational services or any digital educational services you are offering are covered by the relevant national transposing measures. And then, if that is the case, apply the accessibility requirements that are set forth in the directive and where the harmonized European standard grants presumption of conformity. And to be able to check that, we have here a link you can see on the slide where you can check the relevant national measures transposing the directive. And you can also check with the relevant national monitoring or enforcement bodies that have been appointed under the Web Accessibility Directive. They may be able to help you, how can I say, unveil the complexity of this situation and help you with some of the interpretations that are necessary. So next slide. So what should you do in case the directive does apply to your university? What could you do if you quite simply wish to have implement accessibility requirements on a voluntary basis as part of your digital inclusion policy in your university, even if the Web Accessibility Directive formally doesn't apply to you? So next slide. There is an application timeline of the directive that you have to respect if you are covered, and you may respect or anticipate if you are not covered. So in principle, the practical application of the directive has started in September last year. So as of September last year, new websites of public sector bodies, this means websites that were published after the transposition date in September 2018 had to be accessible. This September, there's a big deadline coming up, because it means that all websites, all the ones that were already published before the transposition date, including the new ones, so all websites will have to be accessible under the directive by the 23rd of September this year, and all mobile applications of public sector bodies that are covered by the 23rd of June 2021. So these are the important dates to bear in mind if the Web Accessibility Directive applies to you. Next slide, please. And if it does apply to you, then please do not forget the accessibility statement. This really has to be published on the relevant websites and mobile apps by the time that website or mobile app needs to be accessible under the directive. There are two parts of an accessibility statement. The Commission adopted an implementing act with a template for such an accessibility statement, and that provides for these two parts of mandatory content and optional content. In the mandatory content part, you have to provide information on the compliance status of the website. It has to highlight which content is not accessible on the websites and the reasons why it is not accessible. It also has to provide the date of preparation and the last review of the website, and provide contact information or link to a feedback mechanism for the person who is using the website and may wish to give some feedback on the accessibility or non-accessibility of certain parts of the website. And it also has to provide a description of and a link to the enforcement procedure. So what steps the person are open to the person in case it doesn't get a response to the feedback provided through the accessibility statement. And then there are certain types of optional content that can also be provided in the accessibility statement, like the explanation about the public sector body's commitment to digital accessibility, some formal political or administrative endorsement of the statement, or the date of publication and last update of the accessibility statement itself, a link to an evaluation report, or additional phone assistance for persons with disabilities, or in general support for users with this of assistive technology. And then, of course, you can provide any further relevant information that you consider important in that part of the accessibility statement. Next slide, please. So this concludes basically the part of the presentation on the web accessibility itself and the impact it has on higher education institutions if they are in the scope of the directive. But here there are now a number of ways of how universities can get involved in supporting the implementation of the directive or fostering digital inclusion more in general. So one is about teaching accessibility. It's about mainstreaming accessibility, getting involved in research and innovation, and possibly also in conformance testing. Next slide, please. So We are working with an expert group of representatives from member states who liaise with us for the implementation of the directive on the ground. And we have heard from many member states that there is a real skills gap in terms of experts or IT specialists that really know about web accessibility, can implement it and maintain it or upgrade it. So one of the ways in which universities could really help is in teaching accessibility as part of IT studies to address the skills gap in different universities and also in vocational settings, because there are also IT specialists or IT professionals already working who do not know about it and may have to implement it as of the dates of applicability in the directive. So this can be web developers, it can be web editors, it can be important for many people. So also now staff working in public sector bodies that have to deal with the web pages, that have to make it accessible. They might benefit from vocational training. For people, contracting authorities who have to procure accessible, for content management system vendors, for certifiers, and also in terms of conformance testing afterwards, once the website has been made accessible, to test whether it is really in conformity with the directive. So this is one way. So our feedback that we've had, we've not been able to verify it, of course, with every member state to the full extent, is that there are not many universities that offer accessibility as part of their IT curricula. There are only very few, and it would be very helpful if there were more who would offer it as part of their teaching. Then they can also get involved in the division of accessibility guidelines and curricula and try to cooperate across the EU. And in doing so, involve the different stakeholders and addressing different needs according to different disabilities that people may have. So next slide. Another thing that could be done by universities is mainstreaming accessibility. So beyond teaching it as part of an IT curriculum, to also offer it in other curricula like architecture, marketing, management studies, or law, so that people learn specifically about the legal situation, when accessibility has to be applied, under which laws, and as part of management studies, how to better include people in the workplace, for instance, or for marketing and for architecture. Of course, for the built environment is also an important aspect. And then, of course, by making all teaching material available in an accessible manner so that people with all disabilities can benefit from it on equal terms. Next slide, please. So the third dimension that universities could get involved in is research and innovation. So we we launched a stakeholder consultation last year in October to prepare the Horizon Europe program. In my unit, we are also responsible for language technologies. So we did it together with that section for web accessibility and language technologies to come up with future research challenges in both areas, and also some areas where there may be synergies between the two. So for web accessibility, there were 3 areas where the experts, we invited some 50 experts from major research institutes and universities, and also representatives from industry. And they identified these 3 areas where future research challenges should be addressed. One is education and skills. I already spoke about it beforehand. Another one is automation. And then in general, for the accessible digital environment, some challenges. So, next slide, please. So for education and skills, I already talked about it extensively. It's really foster education on web accessibility at university level, but there they said also at multiple levels in society, and creating the guidelines on accessibility standards and curricula, and involving a wide range of stakeholders, in particular persons with disabilities. Another area where future challenges need to be addressed was automation, and there it referred mainly to automating the creation of accessible content and accessibility assessment using, for instance, AI to make it easier to create, for instance, or retrofit content in bulk, things like that. So next slide. And then the third area was the accessible digital environment, they called it. So this had several strands. One was about creating a methodology that would identify vulnerable groups and their needs to underpin the development and the deployment of new technologies, or to move to context-based design that would take into account signals from the environment received and sent by smart objects, and the needs of persons using the online content, including the specificities related to their disability. Another one was relating to creating user-oriented rather than profit-driven algorithms that would also, again, take into account, in particular, the barriers that persons with disabilities face. One example was, for instance, that wheelchair users, they are not really recognized as a person, and could not be recognized as a person by a self-driving car, for instance. And that would be really a disaster for them. So they have to create algorithms and, how can I say, clear a bias in data that are used to create algorithms and smart objects that take account of the needs of persons with disabilities. And the other area was personalization and adaptation, from content creation to input and output, by means of multimodal translation engines or profile automation and standardization, so that the content and the needs on websites or by the devices is automatically recognized according to the specific needs of the person using that website or device. Next slide, please. So, and one of these, other opportunities, of course, to apply for a project proposal with the Commission. We currently have a call open, which is a pilot project from the Parliament about inclusive web accessibility for persons with cognitive disabilities. And the objective is to develop tools supporting independent and inclusive access to online content and services, including consumer transactions for persons with cognitive disabilities. This call closes on the 15th of July. It has a rather small budget, 800,000 euros, but we still expect to fund some two to four proposals. So here you are still welcome to participate, and you get to the call text and the conditions for participation by clicking on the link on for the acronym for the call, the COGN 2020. And next slide. So we already support a number of projects that, research projects that support the implementation of the Web Accessibility Directive. One is YTools, that develops resources on accessibility conformance testing, including rules to transparently document consistent testing procedures. The Y Guide is on curricula for web accessibility. Watcher is a platform and a set of tools for accessibility evaluation, monitoring, and reporting. And We for Authors is about application of web accessibility requirements in content, in authoring tools that automatically take into account accessibility. Then there are two calls where the calls have already closed. So one is for an digital accessibility observatory that will collect information that's important for member states in implementing the Web Accessibility Directive. In that call, the evaluation is completed. And there is another call that's also just closed. It's for mobile applications translating between speech and sign languages, and there the evaluations are upcoming. So that, I think, concludes my presentation. If you can move to the last slide. You will find links to the directive, to the model accessibility statement, the harmonized standard, and our webpage on web accessibility. Also the list of monitoring, reporting, and enforcement bodies that may help universities in member states on the ground to find out whether they are covered by the Web Accessibility Directive or not. You will also find the link to the list of national transposing measures, which are important if you want to find out whether your university is covered. We also have the link to this pilot project that I just spoke about, where the call closes on the 15th of July. And here's also a link to the full report on the stakeholder consultation we conducted in October last year, where you can find more details about the various challenges we identified and that we may use for preparing calls under Horizon Europe, excuse me. And our functional mailbox if you have questions. concerning the Web Accessibility Directive and whether it applies to you or not, you're quite welcome to write to us, and we will help you to the extent that is possible, of course. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you for a very informative overview of the directive and the possibilities also for us as universities to do some research and see if we can do something together. So thank you very much once again. Then I think because time is running, we should immediately go to the first part of this conference, which is an exchange of good practices, and we have a number of speakers listed over there. So the first one I would like to give the floor to is Mrs. Professor Petra Videmsek from Ljubljana. She is the leader of the Work Package 5 on inclusion in our EUTOPIA project, and she's going to speak about EUTOPIA's ambitions in the field of inclusion. So Petra, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Luke. I would just like to check firstly if I'm sharing the screen or you will do it. So just to find out how we are going to do it.
We'll do it, Petra.
You will do it.
Okay.
Because I can do it, it will be maybe easier just to
Okay,
that I do not need to ask all the time to press the.
Perfect.
Okay. It's already on. Am I sharing it?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. So welcome everyone on the other side of the screen. This is the best impression that I can say because we are sitting after in the tables and just seeing each other, only those who are attending this meeting and having the presentation. Instead of being in the nice friends, we are sitting at our homes or at our offices at least. But I would like to say that this title for the joint conference, it's for this EUTOPIA week, is just perfect title since it stems from the context of past and existing COVID experience when our all lives and activities replaced and put into the digital world. I'm sure I do not need to remind you how our lives have changed and that our study programs were transferred to online teaching. Over the night, university responded to a new situation, and this challenging period has moreover offered us the opportunity to reconsider our values and revisit our policies regarding the inclusion, which is a key priority of EUTOPIA. And I really appreciate this title because it has the content of inclusion. And this gives us the opportunity to debate about inclusion, more precisely about digital inclusion, how we understand it, where we are, and where our ambitions lead us. I really need to say that I'm not expert of digital inclusion, but for the last 25 years, I'm dealing with the concept of inclusion for disadvantaged people, especially for people with the disabilities in different levels, from the personal level to structural level, and even more to building new opportunities in innovation with the involvement of expert by experience into the education and also into the research. But in these days, digital inclusion is part of the inclusion and cannot be separate for it. So when I was asked to talk about EUTOPIA's ambitions in the field of exclusion, when I was brainstorming what to say in these 15 minutes, I have so many ideas. But since EUTOPIA project is at the first stage or setup stage, and we and Work Package 5 are just at the point where we are defining what inclusion is. We are drafting the definition of inclusion, which we find crucial to build the change and gives us the opportunity to define who are excluded group of people. And we are at the point that we are analyzing the legislation in all partners organizations about the inclusion. But as I said, because we are at the beginning of the project, I decided to emphasize through a practical example that inclusion is not an abstract concept, that it's not a fashion brand mark or trendy catchword, but it's rather a concept that needs to be addressed and discussed because for the disadvantaged group of people, inclusion is something really real. We need to include the excluded if we wish to reach the goal of EUTOPIA Alliance, which are to be open, accessible, diverse university that is based on the main values of equality, participation, and openness. Therefore, I will use COVID-19 situation as a background of my presentation. I believe that this situation is perfect learning opportunity for our project. It clearly shows us where we are with the inclusion and what we need to do for our mission to be accomplished. I'm coming from the field of social work, and maybe this is the reason why I choose this topic, because we believe that theory changed the practice, and theories become from the practice, and practice always shows us if the theory works or not, and what we need to change. And I think that our project, since it is in the beginning, we can see how inclusion works in this project. COVID-19 demonstrates how inclusive our university is, and in practice, of course, and what we need to do to achieve our goals. Despite this terrible situation with COVID-19, this was one of the best learning opportunities for us that is based on the concept learning by doing. This extreme situation shows how we need to operate in an extreme situation. And as I said, COVID urged us to rethink the function of our universities. All study processes were put online and rely on the use of digital tools for education, as well as for organizing distance meetings. The experience exposed the most vulnerable and excluded member of our communities and demonstrate the need to scrutinize our work and learning environment from the perspective of those that are most vulnerable. Since Work Package 5 deals with the inclusion, we could not avoid the questions about experience regarding the effects of COVID-19 on the equality, diversity, inclusion for students in higher education in all our partners organizations. We become aware that a good legislation about inclusion is just not enough. Well-prepared legislation is just the beginning for the equal access. But if it's not implemented, it does not serve the purpose and does not give students the feeling that they are truly included in the process. Student experience, when all work was transmitted digital, exposed how inclusive our university is, and short survey shows how we are doing. This is just on the picture, the presentation of my class. I have a small class, only 28 people, so we asked them to open also the video so that we have been able to see each other, and this was our new reality. And all partners organizations reported that through COVID situation, when everything was put on the digital way, they reported of both positive and negative experience with the digital inclusion. The survey highlighted that on one hand, we need to increase this awareness of digital exclusion. And on the other hand, we need also to promote digital inclusion, since it has some advantages for disadvantaged group of people as well. And if we want to do step forward inclusion, digital exclusion should be acknowledged so that the participation will be possible. We need to understand this dual nature of ICT, how it both enables and disables. Web accessibility is stated as being for everyone, irrespective of ability, language, ethnicity, cultural background, social economic status, age, or anything else that may restrict freedom to have access. There is no mention of disability or any specific requirement for access technology. Through COVID experience, we have learned that if we want to talk about digital inclusion, we need to ensure that students get the instruction how to use technology. We cannot assume that students, since they are the generation that is excellent in using ICT, will know how to use it. And further on, we need to ensure that each student will have access. Digital inclusion is the ability of individuals and groups to access and use information and communicate technologies. So if they do not have access, they cannot participate and be included. And many students in this situation reported that they didn't have access to the necessary technologies or software. So access is the point at which the issue of exclusion begins. And we also need, or better say, we have learned that during these lectures online, the presentation need to be prepared in the easy read formats. That means that they should be short, not as I have it here. They should be short, use of language should be simple, format size should be a little bit bigger, so that also people with visual and hearing impairment or dyslexia or foreign students can use and follow the lectures. And we also need to ensure students reported that sometimes classes are just too long. They need breaks. It is hard to follow for 1.5 hours and listening all the time to one speaker. So, and we also need to ensure that since the libraries have been closed down, we need to ensure the open access to the books and study materials. And digitalization also shows that in one way, the digital study was cheaper since students didn't need to pay for their travels, etc. But in the other hand, it put some students in really hard position since they lost their small jobs, incomes, needed to leave student accommodation. And some of them didn't have place where to go, or didn't have quiet place where to participate to the lectures or study. And since I just outlined some suggestions, what needs to be ensured to achieve digital inclusion, I think we also need, and it's equally important, to have a look and promote advantages of digital inclusion, since students reported also about the advantages that digital inclusion brings to the study program. And one of them is for sure that in advance prepared video materials gives them chance to have a look more often what have been said. And it's often mean better sound than in the large lectures hall. And it's mean that they could have a look when they have time. And online materials that are produced in advance give also students with special needs possibilities, and others as well, be honest, to hear and read it more slowly and be ready for the presentations and for the lectures. And students with disability also reported that they find digital inclusion and online lectures quite good, since they didn't need to arrange their transport to attend the lectures, and they save some time. And another positive outcome is also that online lectures give everyone chance to talk and offer choices which kind of communication student will choose, chat or oral questions. This is again an opportunity for people with visual or hearing impairments to be active participants in the class, and also have professors to understand what they would like to ask. And students also reported that it was quite easy to pose the question behind the screens. And in another good point in this COVID situation was that we were all put in equal position. Since we were not prepared for using online teaching, we were teaching together students and the professor, how to use this digital equipment. And this was one positive outcome for this. And again, experience with COVID have highlighted our mission and responsibility that we ensure that studies and support services are accessible and inclusive for all student groups. And we can also say that this situation, it seems that these new conditions for work have created increased awareness regarding the diverse needs of students as well as staff. We respond to these needs and establish the offices for psychology support, since we were aware that mental health problems are very likely to get increased, as well as domestic violence and consumption of addictive and illegal substance and related problems started to increase. This has led us also to rethink how to teach and meet the quality teaching online and still keep the contact with our students. So, as I said, COVID situation was really good example what we need to do next time. And if I will just make the message that we can learn, if we want that the university will be open, accessible, and diverse, we need to hear the voices of those who are excluded. We need to open the floor for the participation. We need to invite people to start co-create the context. In our case, invite people with experience of exclusion in the projects, so we can learn what does it mean to be excluded. And EUTOPIA Alliance are following these three main concepts, such as already mentioned co-creation, participation, and also empowerment. And COVID situation shows that we need to start from the bottom up and not the way around, and keep in our mind that excluded people are experts in their life situation and that they know the best how to handle this situation and what their needs are. So we need to hear their stories. As already mentioned, COVID experience was a good example what we need to do to achieve this digital inclusion. And we need to work on more levels. It's not only working on the micro levels, how to prepare access technology and what to bring that everyone will have access, but it's also started with the micro level. As I said, if we want to hear the story, we need to ask people how they are doing. And with the inclusion, we implement the concept of participation that is one of the main values, as I already said, in EUTOPIA Alliance. If I go a little bit further on, participation ensures empowerment, and empowerment of those that have been silently or historically seen as silent participants. Their voice haven't been heard or even overlooked or ignored. So here we come to our third point of EUTOPIA Alliance, to build the university that empowers students. While with this empowerment, we ensure that the university is built up for the most vulnerable group of students. And if I move to the ambitions of our work package. So today's presentation was based on the experience that we have inside of work package 5, which I'm leading with hard support and from my colleague from University of Ljubljana, Fria University, University Pompeu Fabra, University Warwick, and today's host, University of Cergy. Highly motivated team wants to bring about the change and show that inclusion should be part of every work package, and that this is not only the concern of work package 5, but should be from the whole alliance. No matter what we are doing, we need to think about how inclusive we are. It is starting point for our planning to become an open and inclusive academy. In the frame of work package 5, we are going to define what inclusion means, who are excluded group of people, and outline the main strategic that needs to be implemented for an open, accessible university. And analysis will serve us in framing the strategies for inclusion on different levels mentioned, like micro levels with the relationship, on the macro level with the legislation, meso level, sorry, as a legislation, and in the macro level, structural changes. We are going to share also our good practices because we believe that they are already existing. And if we also believe that if we share our good practices, we will learn from each other and change the positions for people that are the most vulnerable. I think that you already understand our ambitions. We wish that inclusion would be part of each work package, from the formulation and preparation of the collaborative platform, of co-creation, the learning materials, and also preparing the website that will be accessible to all, to the promotion of innovation, such as involvement people with self-experience, to the research, to the sustainability, that this will be something that is part of our way, how we are doing. We hope that these are not only the ambitious. We need to change the thinking and realize that exclusion is not done because of someone's disability, but because of the way how society or university is organized, that does not ensure equal access to all. With this experience that we have with COVID situation, shows that EUTOPIA Alliance can take a lead in demonstrating the values, impact, and outcomes of inclusive practices, which can bridge boundaries and many levels. For example, by enabling universal access to digital tools and by developing the technologies and methodologies of digital inclusion. I would like to thank you for your attention. I know that I used my 15 minutes, and I'm much aware that digital presentation is a challenging to all. Firstly, for the presenter, since I'm not seeing you, I do not see your reactions, I'm not getting any feedback, and it's even harder for you, since you need to listen behind this screen and listen to one voice all the time. This digital conference is unique in many ways. I can say that in one way, it's for sure inclusive, because it gives the opportunity to wider public to join us. And we don't need to pay the fee to enter to the conference, and we don't need to spend the money for travels. It is a global conference without borders and passport. But in the other hand, I'm sure that the digital inclusion, all through many positive outcomes that I just mentioned, cannot replace face-to-face meeting and discussion. So I hope that the next time we will have the presentation in live and see each other. So I would like to thank Sarji to organize this event and bring us together. And despite the situation, organized really nice week, that it was based with many ideas and sharing our vision where we would like to go. So thank you for your attention. I think that, as I said, it's not easy to be on this other side, but anyway, thank you. I can see now some chats.
Thank you very much, Petra. Thank you indeed. It was a very inspiring speech. And you reminded us quite rightly that for EUTOPIA, inclusion is not just lip service, that we really take this at heart. I can imagine that there are already some questions, but I would like the audience, the invisible audience, to hold the questions a little bit. And first we will continue with more presentations and more exchanges of good practices. Our next speaker is our colleague Transposing, if I pronounce it correctly, Tsiatsos from Thessalonica University and also from the Epicure network. So welcome very much to you. And by the way, I've been informed that we have tendencies from many different European university networks. There are people from UFE, Europa, Civis, Charm EU, some others I see as well. So that's great. And that's also a form of inclusion that we have here at this moment, that the different alliances come together and try to learn from each other. But without further ado, Professor Tsiatsos, you have the floor, and I think you will tell us something more about Epicure procedures for student admissions and the steps towards what you call gamified virtual mobility. Please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this great initiative and the organization of this week. I'm very proud for participating here because we are hearing new directions, new dimensions that we should also take into account about the digital inclusion and in order to upgrade the inclusiveness in our project as well. So I'm representing here the Epicure Alliance. Epicure is, I would go very, very quickly to these first slides about what is Epicure. Epicure is an alliance with 8 partners, 8 universities. You can see the map here, and also you can see the participants. Our coordinator is University of Strasbourg, and there are participants from Poland, Greece, my university, Austria, Germany. We have 2 universities, KIT and the University of Freiburg, and also another university from France, University of Amsterdam from the Netherlands. And we are trying to develop pilot modules in liberal arts and sciences, and also to offer multilingual courses and to support the European languages. So I would like to create a virtual campus. I'm representing Work Package 4 in Epicure, which is the main work package for developing the virtual campus. So we should take into account this digital inclusion guidelines that are presented by the Commission and also by the previous speaker. And we would like to develop this virtual campus, but also to invent new ways of selecting students and also for the virtual mobility of them. Our alliance is totally student-centered. We have many meetings with our Epicure student board in order to take into account their opinions and their needs. For example, next Monday we are participating in their internal meetings in the student board in order to take into account issues like the digital inclusion issues. And also our alliance plans to offer European degrees. We are working towards this in order to set up a future virtual European LAS degree program. And this is the main work of our Work Package 4 that I'm the leader there, to pave the way for the inter-university campus using this student-centered approach. So we would like to investigate ways and procedures of how to admit the students and how to evaluate the courses, how to create the student modules, and then to create the virtual campus and the virtual university registrar system. And we have followed a totally bottom-up approach. We had made a huge mapping exercise in order to investigate what are the processes for admitting students and also taking into account the inclusiveness, the selection, the legal frameworks, and the language issues among the universities that are participating in the alliance in both undergraduate studies and also in the undergraduate studies. You can see here some main concluding remarks that are totally different admission systems. Most of them are selective, but they are different. The legal frameworks are different, and they are changing almost every year. For example, in Greece, the legal framework has changed the previous week. And the local language is the common criterion in the admission of the students. So if we would like to speak about the inclusiveness, we should take into account the language problem, and also the special categories and the fees is, are different in the universities. Here you can see just a table that is presenting this situation, and we can realize from this table that it's very difficult to harmonize the admission process in an alliance, and I think this is the case for the other alliances as well. More or less the same is the situation in the postgraduate studies. There the things are more flexible because legal frameworks are different, but are more flexible, and we can create joint courses very easy, much easier. And here is the also the map that we have created, where we can see that almost all the universities are selecting the students in a different way, but there is no need for the national language competencies in some of them, and also almost all of them has some fees. And about the inclusion, there are special categories as in the postgraduate studies, and this should be taken into account as well. So in order to harmonize the admission processes and of the students in our alliance, we have decided to follow 3 dimensions: inclusiveness, which means equity, excellence, and internationalization. And towards this harmonization, we have decided in our alliance that in the short term, we should implement some pilot phase content and courses. And in the long term, we will offer, based on these guidelines, we will offer some degrees and some complete program of studies. But during the project, it's very difficult to access students as new entrants in a new university like an Epicure. We will have as students the students that we have until now in our universities. And concerning these guidelines about the inclusiveness for the admission of the students, of course, we are taking into account all these issues about the digital inclusion, but we are we have decided to go a step before in order to take into account other issues, other dimensions like nationality, language skills, and special categories. And our alliance will be open for all nationalities. We will support the students that are fluent in 2 Epicure languages, and for that reason, and the Epicure languages are Polish, Greek, French, Dutch, and German. And towards this direction, we are preparing another work package, pilot courses, in order to support the multilingualism and support the inclusiveness, because a big obstacle to our point of view for the mobility of the students is the problem of language. And for that reason, we are preparing courses there. Also, we would like to support the special categories, and we in the short term, until the end of the project, we would like to adopt the Erasmus Plus student mobility criteria, and also the current criteria, the total of the current criteria in the local universities. And in the long term, we would like us to develop also intercultural education offices in our universities in order to develop intercultural competencies. Also, for the second directions, for the excellence, we have defined some specific criteria, but I do not like to go into in depth with them. I would like, because it's not so related with the specific meeting. The main items are the academic performance, the motivation, the digital and blended learning skills, and domain-specific skills. And we are in the process to define the detailed criteria in all these categories. And about the internationalization, we have also some aspects like the previous mobility experiences, previous experience in the receiving country, and interinstitutional agreements in order to select our students. Based on all these dimensions and all these aspects and criteria, we are following the next steps towards the gamified virtual mobility. And now we are investigating the procedures for evaluating courses and monitor mobility. And in order to create the concept of mobility units, and based on this concept to give the credits to the students that are participating in our courses and are virtual students in the universities and following the process of the virtual mobility. In order to engage more the students, we would like to develop a new assessment, a new monitoring criteria, and both the courses teacher and in both the courses and the students using a gamification approach. And the gamification here is the usage of game elements, but in non-game areas. We would like to include some awards, some scores, some leaderboards, and some gamification, some game-based elements in order to engage our students more. In order to give them credentials and qualifications. And until now, and after the first discussions and the first meetings in our project, we have defined the following credentials and qualifications. The Epicure Track Certificate, which is similar to a diploma supplement, traditional CTS, macro credentials that could be used for this gamification process, and at the end, badges that could be used that will be for skills obtained outside of traditional courses like MOOCs or SPOCs. So in order to conclude, I would say that we have decided in our project not to go in depth with the creation of virtual or digital content now, but before creating this content, we would like, first of all, to take into account what are the main criteria for creating this content. Part of this criteria and part of these directions will be the digital inclusion needs. But we would like to include more criteria like what are the skills that students should obtain, what are the problems that the students could have in order to follow a course, not only the inclusion criteria, but also the language problems. And until the end of this year, we think that we will have the main outputs for designing this digital content and designing this program of studies. And based on this, we will start the design of our virtual campus from next September. And we will take into account all these needs in order to be inclusive, not only digital inclusive, but also inclusive to students that would like to be virtual students to a university abroad. I would be more than happy to answer to your questions. I don't know if you have questions now, or we will have a discussion at the end of this session.
I think it's probably best that we keep the questions until the end of the session so that we can group some questions. But thank you in any case for a very interesting, inspiring talk. I think you touched upon some very delicate and problematic issues like the harmonization of the admission of students. And I'm sure we will come back to that. And I'm also very happy that I learned that, because when I read your title first, I was puzzled by the word gamified. I simply didn't understand it. Now I do see that it's about the gamification of reality. So that's quite interesting as well. So thank you very much. Next on our list is our colleague Ramon Villanova from Pompeu Fabra, EUTOPIA, and he will talk about the digital inclusion mechanisms at University of Pompeu Fabra. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. You have to excuse me, I don't have any slides to show, I'm just going to talk. Let me start by saying that the title of my talk should be The Digital Inclusion Mechanisms at UPF During the Coronavirus. For the past 3 months, we have faced a situation that was unthinkable. When I say we, I don't mean as citizens, but as universities. We did not have any pre-established script at our disposal. It is true that some decisions were forced upon us by the government, but for the rest, we had to improvise. Let me share with you some of the things that we did. First, I would like to make some initial general remarks. At UPF, we began to notice the effects of the coronavirus crisis with the management of Erasmus students that we had displaced in China, Korea, Singapore, etc. Their situation was managed initially by our international service. Later, on February 26, a monitoring group of COVID-19 was formed. It is composed by 12 high-position staff and professors. I'm a member of this group, and that's why I'm giving this talk today. From the very beginning, the monitoring group sought maximum transparency and communication with the university community. To that effect, an informative website in Catalan, Spanish, and English was created and updated daily. Also, we set up a mailbox called Info Coronavirus in order to answer any type of query. The information website contains basic information about corona, what it is, how it is transmitted, basic health guidelines. Also, measures related to teaching, like changes in the deadlines, changes in the teaching methods, shifting of examination dates, tools for remote and distance learnings. And we also posted information related with the administration and services staff. I would like to point out that the UPF academic calendar year consists of 3 terms or quarters. This year, we had scheduled the final exams for the second term from March 18th to the 28th. At the beginning of March, in anticipation of a university closed down due to the corona, the deans were asked to draw up contingency plans for the final exams. 3 options were proposed: taking the final exams online on the scheduled dates, postponing them to a later date in the hope that the confinement would be short-lived, or proposing alternative assessment methods. When we were forced to isolation in mid-March, our main objectives were 3. First, to ensure that the final exams programmed for the second quarter could be carried out without any loss of quality for both students and teachers. 2, to guarantee the development of our third term in the best possible way given the circumstances. And third, to guarantee the operation of essential university services such as payroll payments, internal and external communication, the sustainability of our computer network, and not only for the online teaching. These three objectives determine every decision taken by the university management team. Some words about the digital divide. At the onset of the crisis, we had 135 available laptops at our disposal. I say available because usually they are hourly loan laptops in the library. But since the library was going to be closed, they were available. Later on, we managed to acquire 45 more, and still later 92 more from a special program to set up to help with the digital divide. Now, on March 13th, one day before the university closed down, in order to guarantee the capability of essential services of the administration staff, 52 laptops were handed over to them from the stock that we had. Regarding the students, in order to detect if any of them required a laptop or internet connectivity, we asked to the dean's teams and to the professors who taught during the third term to keep an eye on students. If any student happened to let know that he needed equipment, he was required to fill out an application form. A commission was set up to evaluate and respond to all the requests for laptops and internet connectivity. We have been meeting once a week. So far, UPF has had to provide 173 laptops and 41 connectivity devices. As far as the students is concerned, prior to the coronavirus crisis, an office called UPF Inclusion was doing an active follow-up of about 140 students who needed different types of adaptation to teaching because of hearing or visual difficulties, some type of disorders, mental disorders, etc. As it could be expected, confinement worsened the problems of some of these students. Moreover, the office has taken care of 9 additional students, either because they contracted the disease or because the death of a close relative. I must say that I was greatly surprised in the good sense that only 9 additional students went to the UPF Inclusion Office. I expected, honestly, to be about 50 or 100. As Vice Rector of Community, I have met many times with representatives of students' associations and so-called student unions to know firsthand what are their concerns. I can tell you what they told to me. The digital divide, of course, what they call the privacy invasion during the monitoring of the exams, the lack of a suitable space to study, the variable quality of the online teaching. They also felt that they did not have enough information, and so on. As far as the administration and services staff, now, remote work was the only possibility, of course, hence the need for laptops. Now, maximum time flexibility was encouraged so that everyone could adapt the working hours to their personal needs. They have been informed at all times of the university contingency plans. And to deal with possible distress situations, several public emotional management resources were advertised, together with free advice from a company with which UPF has an agreement. Plus, they received specific weekly newsletters prepared by the Human Resources and Organization area. Now, regarding the teaching and research staff, usually the teaching staff pose their needs to their dean or to the dean's team. Now, if professors expressed the need for computer equipment, they were channeled by way of an application form to the Computer Equipment Commission. Their need for teaching resources to be able to develop teaching or distance examinations have been of 2 types. On the one hand, the available tools and applications like, in our case, Collaborate, Culture, Capture, Hangout Meet, Zoom, etc. And on the other hand, the knowledge and advice required to make use of these tools, because some professors didn't know them. So the latter need has been satisfied mostly through a service integrated in the library called La Factoria, and its 9 workers that have been reinforced lately have provided all the necessary advice so that teachers could carry out their work during confinement. I must point out, in addition, that it's worth to mention that during the confinement, more than a dozen professors, depending on their areas of expertise, have contributed with articles related to the coronavirus crisis to the information posted on the university website. My conclusion is that many of the actions that I have described have been carried out with a sprinter mentality because we believe that they would be short-lived. Unfortunately, we now know that we will have to extend them in time, at least for a while. And our main challenge is to find a way to make them sustainable. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, which is a very interesting case study that shows that we all had these terrible, tremendous problems in coping with the COVID reality. So thank you for sharing this with us. Now, I had one more speaker on my list in the first session. That was Vice Rector Schaper-Rinkel from the Arcus network, but unfortunately she cannot be with us for reasons, just put on the video, yeah, for reasons that she is ill, so we wish her very good wellness. But I was informed that there is a colleague from the Arcus network, Mrs. Marie Wittemer, who is with us, and maybe Mrs. Wittemer is willing to say a couple of words on behalf of the Arcus team. So Marie, are you? Yes, I can see you.
Yes, hello, but I'm from Civis. I'm not.
Oh, sorry, from Civis. Sorry, but you were willing to say something anyway.
Yeah. I just wanted to say a few words, not very long, because all the presentation and the words from the Commission have already set up the framework and given a lot of good information. Digital inclusion was a part of the strategy and the mission statement from Civis at the really beginning of it. And now, as we are during the implementation time and also with the COVID-19 crisis, we saw all the benefits that we could get from it, but also all the difficulties that may arise. The first point was the accessibility, of course. We had been doing some work on the mainly first around mobility, but also about how to involve students that may have disabilities within our European university, and how mobility as such, but also digital or blended mobility could be an asset, and how we could have projects that include them from the beginning. But this accessibility problem became, of course, bigger with the crisis, and we saw that many other students, we had thought from the beginning that the possibility in our pilot projects to have different types and to create and develop new types of mobility would really be an asset for inclusion. Because mostly in our 8 universities within Civis, mobility, at least the classical one, was still something linked to excellence, or at least to a certain types of students having very good grades and to some level. The first idea was really to extend this. So directly at the kickoff meeting, we have rectors have chosen to sign an overall Erasmus agreement covering all disciplines, all levels, and opening the possibilities to do some mobilities much more easily. And it was also recognized by all our Erasmus Plus national agencies. Of course, when we add the digital part, we saw during the crisis that we could take it as an opportunity to develop the virtual or blended mobilities, but that the students were also really careful on the recognition and the quality that could go with it. So we decided to take some time to really have a deep reflections, as we have a work package which is not on inclusion but can be linked, because it's on innovative pedagogy, on virtual mobility, and also on multilingualism, with the underlying of inclusion in all of them, and how to cross these multilingualism, virtual mobilities or courses, and innovative pedagogies that are all needed to get really some results. And the point also to get some further education for our academics is also an important point to foster inclusion, because sometimes it's also difficult for them to get to digital, not only on the techniques but also on how to adapt pedagogies, as it was said already before. So it's also a new step from our task force on innovative pedagogies to take into account really the digital aspects much more than at the beginning, because they were thinking more on how to foster innovative pedagogy and give further training first in the classroom, or how to do it from one university to the other, or from one type of education to the other. And now the digital came in between at a new point, really to take as mainstreaming from the beginning, which is good in a way, but which had to be done very quickly during the crisis. And now we are trying to see how to get a longer term perspective. All our university really thought from the beginning of the crisis on the inclusion aspects, because the first thing we did together with university members was to gather and share on all the solidarity actions that were taken at each university, to get some ideas from each other, and also to put them digitally so that the students could get also the information as soon as they could. And maybe to open some services from one university to the other to be able to support them. Also, the students that were in mobilities outside their own university could access to it. I completely agree with the first intervention from your university, from European universities, so from EUTOPIA, on the point of participation and empowerment. The idea of inclusion is really to foster the empowerment, and it could be on the side of mainly, of course, the student, but also taking into account the staff, which can be administrative, but also academics. But on the administrative, we also need to do some actions, as they will be the one that will interact and that will put in place the different tools, and that the digital is not always easy and sometimes also not accessible. We saw it during the lockdown, and we made a lot of effort on that, and we want to continue this support so that it can be more easy. The multilingualism and the linguistic aspect is also there. Up to now, we are trying to find solution, and for example, some language cafe that would hold at the beginning in presential could be done virtually, and open new possibilities, even if it's very simple actions. The fact that it's open and broadened to all our 8 universities gives a different asset. And also the intercultural aspects was really one point from the beginning as well, on how to do virtual mobility, but keeping the interculturality within it. This intercultural feeling that you get when you go to another university, that you may not have through digital mobility, which is still in question, and we are going to experiment on that aspect to see if maybe it's better to go towards really deeper technology like 3D or artificial intelligence to get that intercultural feeling, or on the other way, if there are other less technical but more pedagogical and methodological solutions that would foster it. And we would, of course, gather then the result and the impact afterwards from the students to see which solution and or could be the best to give that intercultural feeling and to keep the interaction and the collaboration because in a way, when we have this kind of meeting or opportunity to have this good conference, we have a collaboration, but at the same time being all behind our screens, sometimes it's just one moment and it's more difficult to go on a midterm or long term and together. So that's also one of our raised question. Of course, it was also quite difficult for all our IT teams to cover this period and to go on with the IDs and from the European universities. So it was also a moment to thank them and to see how it's important to get person trained in that aspect among our members, and also for the doctoral level, for example, the decision to make some specific new transversal classes within the European University is in projects under this aspect. So yeah, rapidly, that it's what I would say from this side.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks indeed for saying something about the place of inclusion within the Civis Alliance. Meanwhile, I was informed that we do have somebody from Arcus amongst us, that is Mrs. Heather Harker. So I don't know if she wants to intervene at this moment. You're most welcome, Mrs. Harker.
Yes, hello. Hi,
hello.
Thank you. Hi, thank you. Well, I've consulted with the people from Arcus from here, and inclusion in our project is kind of a transversal topic. But I can, if you want, tell you what the University of Lyon 1 has done in relation to maintaining accessibility for the students during self-isolation and the difficulties that we encountered and what we did to respond to that. It's not necessarily representative of all of Arcus, because Arcus, it's not a specific topic to the project, but it's like I said, a transversal topic. It's of interest to everybody.
Yeah. No, by all means, I think it's very interesting to hear the specific case studies of how universities cope with what happened. So go ahead.
Okay, so just to give everybody an idea of where I'm at, I'm a teacher researcher in the physics department, and I've been working since September 2015 for the disability services. And we accompany about 1,000 students right now. All of our geographical sites included, all sorts of disabilities included. There's actually quite a few students for the number of personnel that are staff that are mobilized. And the main difficulties that we encountered with the shutdown, and so the isolation and the visual, studies at a distance with visual support, were from two types of students principally. One are the autistic students, and the other are the students that have hearing disabilities. The autistic students found complications with being with the isolation and having schedules not on their regular schedule, things like that. So that was actually somewhat easier to deal with. With the hearing disabilities, we actually found students that were able to take down notes during the visual courses and write down really literally everything that transpired, and were able to give those notes to the students so that they were able to follow. So with all of those different things, I don't think we lost any students that were in contact, really in close contact with us. And we have some students, like I said, the students specifically with hearing disabilities that responded to our initial inquiries saying, I can't do this, I can't deal with this new way of doing things, with the new way of studies, with the visual courses online, I can't follow. And we were able to go and retrieve those students. So the students that I know of that were actually responding to our inquiries that we were able to work with, I don't think we lost anybody, which is actually a very positive as far as I'm concerned. Those are the principal difficulties that we did encounter. That said, we also found some really positive aspects where students that, for example, with psychological, not exclusively, but psychological difficulties that weren't able to always be present during courses, and that was before self-isolation. Those students already had methods for working on their own, recuperating coursework from pairs, and dealing with it on their own. And those are students that were kind of, in some cases, shunned by the teaching staff before isolation. And during the isolation, the teaching staff recognized that these students weren't leaving, were following, did have the methods, did have the self-discipline to follow. And so there's a real turnabout in relation to that. And the other thing that's really positive that's come out for us is what's available online and what's possible online. We have students that weren't in capacity to come and be physically present for exams. Maybe they were hospitalized, maybe whatever the reason was, they weren't able to be physically present for an exam. And now there is no reason for the teaching staff, of which I'm part of again, there's no reason for the teaching staff to say it's not possible to conduct these types of exams at a distance. So yeah, that's kind of the difficulties that we encountered, the major difficulties that we encountered, and the barriers that we were in front of before that were able to, that were made to fall during this kind of strange period of isolation and digital influence, let's say. I don't know if that's clear.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I think we had a very interesting group of testimonies, which showed to me that well, what I picked up from different interventions is that we all started this idea of entering an European alliance with taking inclusion very seriously. But of course, we were thinking in traditional terms. And I also learned that two issues came up gradually as we moved during the first months of our alliance and our networking. That is the problem of multilingualism and how to deal with that. And on the other hand, the place that we have to give to the digital in function of the mobility. And then of course came COVID, which had a tremendous impact on all our universities. And we had to revolutionize our way of thinking and our way of acting in a way. So There was lots of things to discuss and to share further information about, but dear audience, you have been so quiet for a long time, so I would now like to open up the floor. And the best way to organize this is that when you want to ask a question, just signal by raising your hand in the chat space. And I will try to manage the incoming questions or requests for taking the floor. And then, of course, it is quiet as always. That's no difference with a real conference. So we are just waiting until there is somebody who wants to take the floor. Isn't there anybody at all? Actually, I have a question for all of the speakers. One of the things that fascinates me is the whole issue of the harmonizing of the admission of students. And some of you have some experience with it, trying to harmonize the rules and regulations within your alliance network. Are there any thoughts about the possibility, the feasibility, the necessity of harmonizing it across university alliances? And should we go for a European standard? Anybody who wants to respond on that? Maybe our colleague from Greece. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you for your question, because we have a specific task in our project in order to investigate this harmonization. It's a very difficult task. We have finished this task last April, in the 6th month of the project. And we have realized that it's very difficult to harmonize all these processes, laws, legal frameworks, and cultures in the local universities. And the problem is bigger, I think, in the inter-alliance level. For that reason, we have decided as a consortium, of course, to produce some main basic guidelines for the harmonization and inclusiveness of our students and the admission of the students, but every year to revisit our deliverable and update it according to the legal frameworks that are produced in every country. I think that's a very good idea to have collaboration, either alliance collaboration towards this direction, because if we find the common basis and some common criteria for the alliances to admit the students, could be better to create a standardized version of them at the end. So if you want, I would propose this to our coordinator, and we would discuss this. And maybe in another week, in another Epicure week, for example, we can invite all the representatives of other alliances to discuss this specific issue, because for us it's very, very important. We will take this into account, and next Monday we will have our plenary meeting as well, and I will propose this to our coordinator.
Okay, thank you very much. Looks like an interesting initiative. Absolutely. I'm looking to the chat. Is there anybody else, or is it just because I don't see anything on the chat? Is there anybody at all who wants to take the floor? In that case, we can immediately continue with the second part of our conference. No, it starts. I don't see anybody reacting, so we have a very passive, quiet audience, which is probably due to the technical aspects. So we go ahead with our next speaker. So the second part is about discussing the problems and solutions for the digitalization. And the next speaker on my list is Drew Cullen from the Tavistock Institute, who will talk about the Digital Inclusion Atlas. So Drew, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'm going to try and share my screen because there's quite a few animations in it. Hopefully this will work. So now it doesn't. Okay. Okay, can you see the presentation?
Nope.
No, marvelous. Okay, anybody from the technical crew? No. Ah, okay,
Yeah,
try this. Okay, can you see it now?
We see the context. That's your second slide, I think.
Right. Is it moving at all?
No.
Oh, sharing is paused. Bring your shared window to the front. How do I do this? You are screen sharing.
I think it's, yeah. It's
So is it moving now?
I can see the first slide now.
So Medici slide, yeah?
Yes, indeed.
Marvelous. Okay, great. Technology doesn't work, does it? All right, so good afternoon, everybody. My name is Joe Cullen. I'm the scientific coordinator for a program called Medici, which if you think back to the presentation given by the representative from DG Connect at the start, and she talked about the new call for pilot projects. This is a pilot project from a previous call, which is being funded by the European Parliament and managed by DG Connect with a budget of about €1 million. And it's all about trying to understand what works in digital inclusion. So I'm not going to talk specifically about higher education or universities. I'm going to try to give you a picture of the bigger picture, the bigger context, and how we collect evidence about digital inclusion and what works. So I'm going to start, as we've been focusing on all afternoon, with COVID-19, which for me, of course, is immediate in everybody's lives at the moment. And what it's done is to highlight and bring to the fore and accentuate the much bigger picture societally and structurally around digital inclusion or exclusion. And as we all know, COVID-19 has ushered in unprecedented disruption of work, life, well-being, everything. And in particular, if you look at the World Economic Forum's recent list of how COVID has accelerated the impact of digital technologies, for example, in online shopping, in payments, we no longer use cash to pay for stuff. It's all contactless. Work is now pretty much the norm to do from home. We've seen through the previous presentations how it's affected distance learning for higher education, but across the whole spectrum of education. It's very difficult to get an operation that you had planned for March. They've all been put back to September or onwards. So pretty much everything that in the health sector is being done through online triage, and it's massively affected supply chain of goods and everything all over. But the corollary of that is, as the impact of digital technologies become more pronounced during the pandemic, it's accentuated digital exclusion. So older people are much more at risk from COVID than younger people. Remote and rural areas are much more disadvantaged because they don't have the broadband speed to be able to access all the services I've mentioned. People from poorer backgrounds can't afford the technology. We heard earlier about the issue of laptops from store in Spain, and that problem has happened across the whole spectrum of the education sector. So for many families and poorer backgrounds who are now they have to homeschool their children, they can't do it because they don't have the technology. And recent UNESCO figures show that more than 87% of the world's student population, that's over 1.5 billion learners in 165 countries, have been affected by the closure of educational institutions. And as I've said, that means that issues around digital inclusion have been much more accelerated and accentuated through COVID. The problem is that, as we've seen, digital media and tools are potentially extremely powerful assets to help disadvantaged people play a full part, not only in digital society, but in society in general. But all the data show that disadvantage through geography, your location, if you live in a rural environment, but even in some city areas and you don't have access to broadband, you're struggling. Geography, age, income, and education prevents vulnerable people from taking advantage of the digital society's opportunities. And the result of this is digital exclusion amplifies and exacerbates social exclusion. And it creates a phenomenon called dual exclusion. So we know that action is needed because of this at every level, from the local to the national, to try to ensure that no one is left behind in the so-called digital revolution. The main problem with these actions is that they're all fragmented. Everything works in silos, everything is segmented, there isn't a lot of exchange of information, and more to the point, information about what works between different sectors. And the evidence base on what actually works in this field is very poorly developed. So Medici was set up to try to address this problem of dual exclusion. It always staggers me that 14% of the entire EU28 population have never used the internet in their lives. And as I've said earlier, there's strong evidence of a digital divide, a haves and a have-nots, that's driven by geography, educational status, income, and age. OECD data shows that internet activities are mainly carried out by people with high levels of education. So 58% of internet activities are carried out by users with tertiary education, compared with those in lower education levels. In the UK, the Office of National Statistics showed that more than 1/3 of the poorest children don't have the internet at home or a computer, whereas children from the wealthiest homes all had access to the internet. So the result of that is social inequalities are amplified by digital exclusion and vice versa. We measure this in 3 ways. Firstly, access. So the provision and speed and the power of the broadband infrastructure you have access to will determine your degree of social inclusion or otherwise. Second is usage capability. It's no point having access to the high-speed broadband if you don't know how to use it. So unless you have the digital competences needed to use digital tools and digital medias, it's going to be completely useless. And the third main dimension of digital inclusion, how it's measured, is quality of use. It's no good having access to broadband and services, having the competences to use those tools and services, if you're not able to apply those competences in ways which benefit your life. So for example, people in areas of high unemployment are very unlikely to be able to get a job that allows them to use their digital skills, because the local employment market doesn't allow them to do so. So these 3 things conspire and integrate and feed each other to create digital exclusion. These slides show quite graphically how that works. So we go back to the first dimension, access. It's very clear that if you look at all individuals in the EU28, this is Eurostat data, almost 80% have access to internet. When you look at the 16 to 24 age group, that shoots up to almost 100% and then goes down through the age range. So by the time you get to the age group 55 to 74, the access to the internet drops to almost only half. And it's the same with educational levels. So people with low education, it's less than 60% access. With medium, it goes back to about 80. With higher education, it shoots up to almost 100. The second dimension, as I've said, is usage. It's the capacity to have the digital competences needed to use the technologies. And if you look at data from DG Connect. This shows very clearly, the blue bar shows the proportion in each particular country of people without digital skills who come from disadvantaged backgrounds. And in Romania, for example, it's about 70%. And if you go down to particularly Northern European countries, to Norway, for example, that proportion of people without digital skills who come from disadvantaged backgrounds goes down to less than 10. And finally, if you look at the third dimension, quality of use, again, this distribution of this uses the DESI scale. It's the Digital Economy and Society Index, which connects together connectivity, digital competencies, how the internet is used, how it's integrated within society, and how it's integrated within public services, for example, banking, health, and education. You find a similar pattern. So Eastern European countries like Romania are way down on the index, and those in the more affluent Northern European countries are way up on the index. Oh dear. So the European Commission and the EU have put in a range of policies to try to address this situation, and we concentrated in the past few presentations on things like disability. So there are different initiatives that are designed to reduce this digital divide. And this is where Medici comes in. As I said earlier, it's a major initiative funded by the European Commission via the European Parliament to create a digital atlas of interventions, programs, projects that are working to reduce the digital divide and to support digital inclusion. So Medici is at heart a digital atlas. It provides a map and a set of a catalogue of good practices that show interventions that try to involve people more fully in digital society. It tries to identify areas where no initiatives exist already, and therefore show the gaps across Europe where digital exclusion is high and the support needed to address it is low. It tries to disseminate knowledge, in particular evidence base on what works throughout communities of practice that work in digital inclusion, so as to support knowledge creation and particularly the diffusion of evidence. It does it through this. So our problem is the needs of vulnerable groups in society are not being met by digital inclusion policies. So Medici develops activities to improve the knowledge base, integrates the results and things that work, creates a good practice catalogue and an interactive map and atlas to show what works where. And then hopefully at the end of the project, we will have contributed to increasing the digital inclusion of disadvantaged groups. I think it's necessary to provide some definitions. What do we mean by digital inclusion? According to the Digital Single Market Strategy for Europe from the Commission, digital inclusion means ways to ensure that everybody can contribute to and benefit from the digital economy and society. And as I've said, it involves three things: connectivity, capability to use connectivity, and the quality of use, how you actually apply those competencies in ways that improve the quality of your life. Our best practice, our definition of the best practices that are in the Atlas is a practice that's been proven to work well and produce good results. So each case in our Atlas of good practices provides good results. It deserves to be shared. The knowledge deserves to be shared, and it can be learned from other people who are interested in inclusion. We have 5 groups of vulnerable people. They're people with disabilities, elderly people, young people who are on the margins of society, people who are unemployed and have social problems, and migrants. So each of the practices in the Atlas is geared towards either one or more of those vulnerable groups. This is how it works. So at the heart of the Atlas of Medici is a catalogue of 200+ digital inclusion good practice cases, things that are demonstrated to work in particular situations to support digital inclusion. It's supported by a platform that allows access to the catalogue. It's supported by a knowledge community, people who work in this frame, people who are experts, practitioners in supporting digital inclusion programs, and other stakeholders. The idea of the knowledge community is that it will itself contribute to creating good practices that will be stored back in the catalogue. And then we have a very important element of Medici, of the catalogue and the atlas, which is about evaluation. This is an example of one of the cases, one of the good practices in the atlas. It's called Savi Chavi. The target group were young Roman, young travelers who, as you know, are highly marginalized, highly vulnerable to social exclusion, likely to be unemployed, likely to be the victims of discrimination, with very little access to digital tools and media. So what Savi Chavi does, it trains young travelers to use digital media and tools from a dedicated platform so that they can then take part more fully in employment programs, in sharing news and knowledge, in interacting with each other, and in getting more integrated into mainstream life. The reason why it's in our atlas is because we have good evaluation data on whether it works or not. Which brings me to the evaluation elements. Evaluation is crucial to how the atlas works and what its purposes are for. This is a slide from a recent study we did, a piece of research for the European Commission on digital inclusion initiatives for young people who are vulnerable and on the margins. And it divides these initiatives into different categories in terms of what evaluation evidence we have on whether they work or not. So, as you know, the gold standard of evaluation is experimental methods, randomized control trials, control comparison groups, longitudinal studies with a target group about what works over a period of time. If you look at this particular research project, we find that none of the initiatives, this is about 80 or 90 initiatives we looked at, none of them actually use experimental methods, control comparison groups, or randomized control trials. Most of the evaluation evidence either comes from a survey, a cross-section of people who were involved in the program and what happened to them, or it's anecdotal. It's just case studies, happy charts about what happened when it was run. So what we know from this is that the evidence base, the actual amount of evidence on what works, is very, very low. So what Medici tries to do is to increase that evidence base. And we have three types of initiatives, of case studies, of good practices in the atlas. Cluster A is innovative interventions. These don't have evidence, but they're innovative. They haven't been going long enough to collect the evidence about whether they work or not. So we're tracking them to see how they do. Cluster B, we've classified as effective interventions. These do have evaluation evidence of whether they work. And normally you would have a pre-test before the situation, before the initiative was run, and a post-test, the results and changes in people who took part in the initiative after they participated. Cluster C, the third category, is what we call replicable interventions. And these are very well established initiatives, projects, good practice cases that have strong evidence base that have been replicated elsewhere in different contexts, in different countries, in different areas. And then Medici and the Atlas provides an evaluation support program. We know that the evidence and the evaluation culture in this field is very underdeveloped. So what we're trying to do is provide workshops, podcasts, learning and training events to improve the skills and capacity of people who run these programs in measuring how effective they are. This is what it looks like if I can go into this thing. So this is the Atlas. If you go into it, if it works, maybe it won't. So you'll find that we have around 200 cases of good practice cases of digital inclusion interventions across Europe, and you can select these by different countries, by target groups. So if I look for interventions that focus on elderly people, you'll be able to see that where they are. If you zoom in, you can zoom in hopefully to different countries. I'll go to Switzerland and see where that is. We have 2 in Bergamo, and you can then get evidence, much more detail about how these initiatives work. So that's the main core of the Atlas. Its main function, its main objective is to compile this map, this inventory, and more importantly, to collect evidence that of what works and what doesn't. Can I get back out of this, hopefully? So, I need to get back to my screen. Take this down, get out of this, come back here. Okay, so my final slide is, as you can see, we're trying to make this the most comprehensive evidence base in Europe about digital inclusion, initiatives that try to support it, and more importantly, what works for who under what situations. So my final kind of exhortation, my plea is, if you join the community, and there's the address, you'll be able to input your own experiences of how, for example, in higher education, some of the strategies and actions you've taken, whether they've worked and why, and that will contribute to the evidence base, and we'll all have a much better picture of how it all operates. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Fascinating talk, I think. I liked especially the interactive maps, and I was already wondering, maybe one day we can have that kind of map for the European universities. So thanks again, and hopefully you stay with us for the discussion, because I can imagine there will be some questions about this. I have 2 more speakers on my list for this afternoon, and then we can have another try to have a discussion round. The first speaker is my colleague Tanja Oblak from Ljubljana University, and I have to apologize that I skipped you because there was a mistake in my program, but you will talk about the theoretical insights and digital inclusion. So please, Tanja, go ahead.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm happy to be able to attend and contribute a brief report about my own research that comes from mostly media studies and sociology. So I will discuss many social aspects of digital technologies, also in a conceptual and empirical way, in order to argue how digital technology actually is not a factor that affects on digital inclusion, but merely should be perceived as an indicator of social inequalities. I follow a large extent of critical research in the field of digital divide, which it's been a while that stressed that actually internet access is not only a technical problem, but it's more related to social and personal affordances. And this kind of research and the authors that follow these critical approaches argued almost more than 10 years ago that it's necessary to turn the point in our understanding of technology diffusion, arguing that what we face today is a new type of social stratification, actually, that is happening within the users, not merely between users and non-users of technology. This new social stratification actually means that an inequality in technical appliances exists between or among those who have access to the web. In this regard, actually, distinctions that play a very important role in digital stratifications are social status, economic and cultural resources, even with language-related capabilities, but also cultural capital, education, gender. Such trends within the research are viewed also as a conceptual turn from the digital divide approach to the digital stratification perspective. And consequently, these critical studies argue to move the focus of analysis and discussions beyond the access, not just questioning who is online or not, but questioning what are different intensities and specific patterns of appropriation of technologies, which are significant cultural phenomena. So going beyond access actually means to understand several social and cultural backgrounds that should be taken into account when we discuss digital culture and also digital inclusion. Speaking from the point of view of more individual user, differences among the users can be presented and also empirically tested at 4 different layers or levels. All these layers are intertwined, but for the sake of analytical clarity, it's better to present them separately. First level is a motivational level. This refers to the absence of, I would say, basic digital experience, either as a result of lack of interest or of fear of technology. Namely, motivation points to the question of needs and performances that are formed by individuals to a certain technology. So it's more than a technical or material impossibility. Then, from this motivational level, we can actually derive a material level, which refers to the absence of possession of a necessary technical device. This was once a computer, nowadays a smartphone with the access to network connections. Here, the differences among individuals or group of users are a reflection of the distribution of resources which are provided through the attributed demographic categories such as gender, education, occupation, social status. The third, I would mention the level of skills, which shows that the lack of digital skills is actually determined by insufficient education, absence of social assistance in the use of technology, or also the user's perception of the technology or other devices that may be perceived as unfriendly or something that it's not very easy to use. And the last level is the level of usage, which refers to the, I would say, lack of ability to use the technology, which can be, of course, measured in different sense, from the time of use to the type of applications that are used, and also to the diversity of usage. So stratification patterns among the digital users are therefore results of such social hierarchies as well that are seen through age, family status, education, personal skills and affordances, gender, ethnicity, language, and social position. We use this kind of general focus also in some empirical projects in which we combine sociological perspective with media studies and cultural approaches, which gives additional insight into the problem of digital inclusion. Consequently, digital stratification is closely associated also with cultural capital and class differentiation among the users themselves. This approach differentiates that the cultural resources that can have an influence on when to engage with technology and also how to engage with the technology. So the adoption of technology becomes an indicator of economic capital, but appropriation in the sense of different usage, engagement with technology and training becomes actually a manifestation of cultural capital. So I think that also the theory of cultural capital can be very useful in the debates about digital inclusion. With this complex relationship in mind, and I will not go to the details, but I will just present the very condensed results of this representative quantitative survey that was made within the sample of Slovenian residents. Actually, we divided 4 different types of digital users. One group we named digital realists with average cultural capital. Then the second were techno-skeptics with low cultural capital. The third group were named digital enthusiasts with higher cultural capital, and the last group were technophobes with, again, low cultural capital. And I will just briefly present the significant differences among these groups. Digital realists, for instance, this was the larger group, which was highly self-assessed as frequent users of the internet with high skillfulness and to whom the internet means a lot in everyday life. Demographically speaking, this was an above average educated group, but mostly members of the middle-aged generation, in which the proportion of men and women was quite the same. We assume that this group included the so-called early adopters of the digital technologies. Then techno-skeptics with low cultural capital, it was almost a third of all respondents with the access to the internet. This group is determined by quite irregular, undereducated, and highly uncritical users who, in comparison to the others, highly value the web, but they have very negative attitudes towards it. Then for our discussion, for instance, is very interesting digital enthusiasts as a group with high cultural capital, which of course self-assessed themselves as mostly competent, intensive, and critical to the internet. At the level of practices, they used the internet in very variable ways. But according to the gender structure, for instance, this group was distinctly male and the youngest age. 50% of all the members in this group were under 30 years old. And the last group, which was the minor group, but it's significant also for the discussion about digital exclusion, not just inclusion, are the technophobes with low cultural capital. According to the results, they have very negativistic attitudes toward the consequences of technology, which means that they participate very in small relation to the web, and they have low knowledge of different practices, but they view technology in very stereotypical way. Demographically speaking, this is the group that is distinctly female and also very low educated, and in relation to age, it's the oldest group. In relation to cultural capital, we then at the end wanted to see what is the role of the class, of the social class, how the class typology actually can give some additional understanding of these 4 groups. And we found out that the upper class is predominantly located in the group of digital enthusiasts, while the group of technophobes, which I mentioned before, ranks at the lowest class. Most fall into a routine lower or working class groups. So what we could conclude at that point is that the digital world is a place not of class emancipation or of social mobility, nor it's a cause of social inequalities. Maybe we can say that these results can be put side by side to all those newer theses which oppose the understanding of modern media as a key factor of digital divide, but highlight the digital divide actually as a real indicator of social differences. What this means for the reflection of this recent COVID era and digital native generation, I'm following few of, again, very critical oriented studies, which again argued that the generational divide, that it's not that only important the generation divide between so-called natives and immigrants, but actually we should focus also on the actual divides among the digital native generation. So some studies nicely show that generation of digital natives is also very inner stratified, making the differences in relation to their age, gender, type of study, education of parents, place of living, which make even stronger stimulus for potentially problematic new social inequalities. So this would be from my side for this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for bringing in the theoretical perspective and showing that indeed the digital world is being digitally divided across the board, probably also within our universities. So thanks again. We now, without further ado, go to the last speaker, and then we open the floor to everybody. And the last speaker on my list is Agnes Sarolta-Fazekas from Lorand University in Hungary. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. My name is Agnes Sarolta-Fazekas, and I'm representing the Charm EU Alliance, and I'm the coordinator of the Work Package 6, which is responsible for inclusiveness. I also would like to share my screen, so just give me a few moments. Hopefully everything will be good. Okay, do you see my
Yes.
screen? Excellent, excellent. And I will. Do you see the full screen, right?
Yes.
Excellent.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. So I will start with thanking you, and also it is my real honor to be here and representing the Charm EU, and also talk about the inclusion aspects, and also in general, but also in the digital environment. Today, I will also talk about Charm EU, sharing the main overview of Charm EU, and also I will share with you my main things. All right, so the structure of my presentation is divided in 5 aspects. I will connect to the previous speakers as well to reflect their inputs, because many have been already discussed, and it's a wonderful and rich discussion. So first of all, the Charm EU stands for Challenge-Driven, Accessible, Research-Based and Mobile European University. It is a composition of 5 research-based universities, and we aim to create a very flexible and inclusive learning and student-centered learning environment, and also act and also respond to the fastly changing higher education area, and also meet this new needs, what is also happening in the higher education area, because as you know that the composition of student and staff diversity is increasing, and also the massification of higher education is also an issue. So also in numbers and also in terms of diversity. So what is the core element or the core summary of Charm EU? So we offer this learning experience where mobility and inclusivity has a core element, and it also, we would like to work on the implementation of a transformative approach to program and curriculum design, combining the traditions and combining our variety of that our institutions can bring and enrich this new initiative, and also through curriculum, through knowledge creating teams, and also these flexible skills and skill-oriented modelization structures. So what is the main structure of the program or the project? We are working together on different topics. work packages or work topics are coordinated or led by the different universities. But what is very important to say here that we are working together. So we are also collaborating and co-designing all of these elements. So it's a very, very strong collaboration among us. And what is a very important element from an inclusion point of view, that the inclusiveness have been interarching or like overarching all the aspects of this structure. So this is also a very interesting in the practice how we do that, which I will share with you at a later stage. So what is the mainstreaming and how we understand mainstreaming, inclusion and diversity? And I was very interested to hear about the other speakers' inputs and understanding. So what we understand and what we aim for is that inclusion and diversity sits at the heart of the CHARM EU culture, and also design, the delivery, and also the monitoring processes. I mean, this is a wonderful approach. What we need to ensure that it's really happening. So the meaningfulness and the very seriousness of inclusion and diversity. Additionally, what is very essential for us, that encompassing all voices. We also highlighted through this approach, there's nothing about us without us. So it also means that both students and staff and all the university community are involved. We also created measures and structures how we can involve them. And we also highlighted that these experiences should be reflected, continuously supported the participation, and also that the voice is there with a meaningful way. So today we heard a lot on the elements on inclusion and the understanding on inclusion. Coming from an academic background, I can also imagine that we can dedicate a time for inclusion as a concept, how we understand it. So what I would like to just share with you, that in our alliance, we understand inclusion as a very broad concept, and also that it's not specifically to certain groups or certain individuals, but it's a very broad concept. And what is also important for us to understand the intersecting identities and the intersecting lived experiences of the people, as also that important to say that we have multiple experiences, multiple ways of experiences, how we are excluded or included. So these are very important for us. And this is, I can also tell you that it's a long-term thing, so inclusion cannot happen overnight, but we are step by step working towards this approach, and I will also share some practical details how we aim for that. I also brought a visual regarding the key concept, and I did it deliberately because I wanted to share with you that sometimes inclusion and integration are used interchangeably. And this is also very important to understand that diversity and also the diverse experiences of people are very important to acknowledge and also feel celebrated and also taking into account. So both the parties like the institutions and also the individuals should work together to achieve an inclusive environment. So it's a two-way road. It's a two-way road. So what are the barriers? Today we learned so much about the barriers, but what I would like to just highlight again, that we should start again with how we look at the barriers and what paradigm, what approach we are looking. And what we have been also discussed within the CHARM EU, that we aim for understanding the barriers from an well, how to say, from a human rights-based approach model, and also looking at and questioning and always reflecting what are the barriers, and also looking at that what are causing the barriers for individuals who have different experiences, different access needs, and so on. And regarding the barriers, and I also would like to just come to the discussion on the COVID-19, we had experienced that routines or previous ways of processes, the teaching and learning environment, etc., or even administrative procedures are also sometimes not taking into account the diverse user experience and the accessibility. So these are overlooked sometimes, and we also could experience that during these very restricted times in the COVID-19, this was also an issue. And I also connect my other thoughts, which is time. We also experienced that the teaching and learning environment, the administration, and all parts of the higher education institutions needed to change their and adapt to the new environment, the new COVID-19 situation, their experiences. So time was definitely a barrier to focus on people's experiences and also the access and the participation of the certain teaching and learning materials or the online surfaces. What is also an important thing to highlight is the lack of awareness. What we were also experiencing in the CHARM EU, that there are also different professional expertise, different professional of knowledge, and sometimes not everyone is aware of what is digital inclusion means, or who are the groups, or who is missing out from an information. So it's an important thing to highlight. What we also experience that that there are also a culture of disinterest. In general, I'm not referring to specifically anything, but in general, that the discussion on who is benefiting from inclusion or who is benefiting from digital inclusion. So it is again goes back to the point on that we are talking about a very broad understanding of inclusion or only specific groups. So, and I will also mention the solution and come back to the barriers, because it is also important to highlight how we transform barriers into solutions and what we can do to dismantle the barriers, what I just raised. So first of all, when we were started with the Alliance, we have been very clear that we would like to have this overarching approach for all the work activities that are ongoing. So we have been created a so-called inclusivity checklist for all the work packages. And also we try to manage all these different aspects. How we did it? We first of all mapped all the universities regarding their policies and practices regarding inclusion and diversity. We also identified certain groups that were under protection, and also like under protection from discrimination. And we also identified that what are the needs and what are the important elements that needs to be considered for all the work packages. And simultaneously with this, we are in a process with all the stakeholders and all the work packages to co-create documents and review documents. Written here in this presentation, it sounds very simple, but I can also share with you that this is also coming back to my point when I shared that the different expertise or the different professional areas that higher education professionals are working or experts are working not necessarily have very specific knowledge on inclusion or in this aspect. So I think so as a wonderful thing that we are learning together, and we are also creating new knowledge together in this sense. What we also have discussed is the full and effective participation of people with lived experiences. I also use this terminology because there are so many circumstances, and we involving them in our processes, in our work packages, and also continuous monitoring processes have been started, and also the voice to be heard. What is also interesting that previously we heard about website accessibility, for example. There are all the different points. We also would like to constantly monitor and review our digital tools, that what is the experience of people. So as it was said, what is an experience who is using somebody who is using a screen reader, or whose language is not, like English is not as a first language, etc., etc. And what I also wanted to address here, and I was very carefully listening to your inputs and contributions, that we also have two approaches that I think so that it's also interesting to consider. First of all, having a very holistic approach of needs. Again, we understood that having a needs assessment of students, other stakeholders in the university, it really creates a more inclusive environment. And also a needs assessment can be specifically to knowledge, but also specifically skills. So we are also matching these things together. And what is another point I wanted to make, that we have been discussing on certain groups, but what we aim for in our work is the universal design approach for digital environment and in general in the Charm EU environment, because what we experience that creating an environment which is accessible and usable, it is also everyone benefits. And what is also important here to address is not the reactive approach, but rather having a preventive, or like designing with an inclusive mindset from the zero point of view. So this is what we are aiming for. This is our approach that we are aiming for. And of course, I'm very well aware and very conscious about that universal design shall not exclude assistive devices for particular groups. And as well, many of the conventions, for example, the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities also highlights this, which is also have an impact on the EU itself. So I just wanted to highlight that designing to the greatest extent possible is our approach. On a daily basis, of course, it's a step-by-step approach to do that. But I think so this also moves to the human rights-based approach model in terms of how we are designing, involving people, and creating the environment more inclusive. I just want to really quickly have an overview, and finalizing my presentation is to highlight that awareness is something that we need to work on. Why is it important? Why digital inclusion? Why inclusion and diversity matters? And we also need to have a very, how to say, a very honest and a nice dialogue on these circumstances. And also creating in our design and in our mindset and in our reflection activities that universal design approach models, or like these principles, should be also the norm, but it's again a learning process together, and also matching expectations and demands. So with this, I would like to thank you, and I give the floor back to the, and then I will skip the screen. I hope that you can.
Okay, thank you very much, and yes, for a very clear expose that shows again that in all of the European university initiatives, we take inclusion very seriously. So we still have some time now for discussion. So I again would like to say, let's open up the floor. Let's do it this way, that we start maybe with the panelists, and then the people who are following us either on YouTube or on this Zoom can come in. I already have a question from that was posed by somebody on the YouTube channel. That is simply somebody who wants some clarification about what exactly is digital skills. I don't know who would be willing or able to respond to that. Maybe Ju, is that something for you? What is digital skill?
It depends on which perspective you're looking at. If you want, the official perspective is digital skills includes things like the capacity to be able to use a device, so a very basic knowledge and understanding about how to switch a tablet on or use a smartphone properly. But of course, it extends across a wide spectrum. So other skills are the capacity to be able to search for information, using online sources. There's a very comprehensive competence framework that was developed by European Commission's DG Seville, which produced, I think there are about 6 competence areas, from information gathering right the way through to being able to apply digital media and tools in education, in cognitive processes, in learning, and so on and so forth. So it's all very well mapped out formally. If you look at it from the perspective of human capital and social capital, it's a completely different story, because the skills then are around how can you actually address some of the structural conditions and processes that make it very difficult for you to acquire those skills. So I think
do you have any knowledge about studies that, maybe it's too early for that, that show that the digital skills capacities of the human resources within universities have changed dramatically as a result of the COVID crisis?
No, too early.
Too early.
There's a new database the Commission has just launched, and I can't remember the URL, but it has all of the research. It's a fast track system. So normally when you have to go through the academic process of peer review, it will take a year for you to get a paper published. But the Commission has just set up this COVID research database, and it has I think 500 or 600 really state-of-the-art, very, very recent research papers that haven't yet been validated, which is a hugely interesting and very useful repository for information on what's happening. Can't remember the name, sorry. But if you kind of search for it.
Yeah, sure. Okay, anybody else who wants to bring up an issue, start a debate? Everything very quiet again. Well, then the only thing, if there is nobody who asks the floor.
There is this, sorry, Luc, there is
yes.
this comment on YouTube.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Usability checklist for all work packages is a very practical idea. Practical, I'm not sure, a good idea, but I think a quite difficult one to implement. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, I have the feeling that if you look at the different cases that we heard today, that there must be some scope to do some things together. Although I have no idea what exactly, but I can feel that there is a kind of sentiment that we should do it. Maybe Agnes or somebody else would like to come in on this point.
Thank you so much. Yes, I mean, the inclusivity checklist is definitely supporting the working groups in our alliance. And I think so, according to their feedback and to their discussions, it's very practical. And what I would also suggest that we are also giving with this inclusivity checklist a points of references, a points for reflections, that what are you missing from your design? And of course, we always highlight that it's a non-exhausting, non-exhausting checklist, but we try with this universal design approach, we try to have the broadest possible. Of course, we will following and monitoring that what is missing, and having people with different life experiences and access needs, they can be definitely telling us that what are we missing. So thank you.
May I?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Oh, thank you. We have almost the same approach, but not as a checklist. As I have told you, in our Epicure Alliance, we're following the mapping exercises methodology. We're creating maps about everything, every best practice that is followed in the partners of our alliance. I think that this about the inclusiveness, there are many aspects that should be taken into account, and I really like your idea to work together on that. And maybe Anouk Cho, who is in our meeting now, maybe can speak about this multilingualism aspect, about the inclusiveness, because she is also partner from the University of Amsterdam in our alliance. And she's the leader in work package 2 about the multilingualism and inclusiveness.
Thanks very much for that very kind introduction, Tras. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks a lot for these awesome and very interesting presentations. It's really fascinating to see how our alliances are coping with similar challenges and all are very resilient and trying to find solutions. As Tras mentioned, multilingualism is one of the key highlights in the Epicure Alliance project, and one of the ways that we are working on also inclusive governance is by developing a model language policy, not only for higher education institutions as individual organizations, but also a language policy for the future European Universities Alliances. And one of the issues that we have been debating in that context is also how to balance the issue of securing language proficiency in order to be able to meet the academic admissions criteria for our programs with the issue of inclusion and widening participation. And that's a very tricky one. And quite frankly, we don't have the answers yet at Epicure. We're working on them, and we're trying to build in modular components in these language policies so that each institution would be able to pick and choose whatever would be most suitable. And the same is happening at the level of the Alliance, so that in case when we launch special Epicure modules, we will be able to cater for this issue of inclusion and allowing as many students coming from all corners across Europe to participate. And we would be happy to share our ideas for a solution on this particular area with all of you. These model language policies are due to be adopted by our steering committee at the end of this calendar year in December 2020, and it will be public deliverables. So we would be happy to share those and hear your views on this. And in order to prepare for this, we are also organizing a blended event on the 15th of October, focusing on multilingualism and the importance of language policies. And we would be very happy to be able to welcome you online or in Amsterdam at that time and join the discussion. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a very kind offer. And I think all alliances should take this seriously and see indeed if we can learn from each other. Speaking of learning from each other, I have the feeling, well, one of the things that I learned today is not only that we all take inclusion and exclusion seriously, but also that it is a researchable topic, and that the idea is makes sense that we study it and that we share the experiences that we have with coping with it. So I was actually wondering, together with Luciana, would it make sense to make a kind of booklet or book out of these presentations that we had today. Is there anybody that has some ideas? Maybe Luciana, you had some ideas about this?
We discussed with when I invited some of you about this, and maybe it could be a good idea, because together we can seek into this problem from different angles and quite complementary, as I've seen. So this could be a good idea. I'm letting you discuss about this. I think Joe Anguri this time.
Yes, I see that Joe asks for Joe.
Things also. So yeah.
Yes, I've put the locations for the it's called DigComp, the European Commission's digital skills framework, competence framework, and the European Commission's COVID-19 research portal. Both addresses are in the chat box.
Okay, thank you. Then I have Joe Angori. You would like to have the floor?
Thank you, Luc, and thank you, Luciana. Thanks to all for all the inspiring talks today. And it's really amazing to see how much we have in common and how much we are trying to approach the same challenges. I know we're running out of time, but in EUTOPIA, our approach we're taking on our learning communities and our vision to embed connectivity, digital connectivity through our existing curricula is very much aligned with all the principles and challenges and opportunities we're facing. And we will be publishing some of this material. I just wanted to connect the issue of multilingualism and say that we're also trying to see how we can engage with multilingual pedagogies and find how we could create inclusive ecosystems where we can empower students to mobilize and use the language resources in the process of working together, even if that means that they work in common languages, but there are ways to bridge the multiple resources. I think this is a topic alongside pedagogic innovation that I hold very close to heart, and I think EUTOPIA also holds very close to heart because it is really very close to inclusion and inclusivity, and I think that could be in itself a topic for, if of course you all agree, I'm sort of biased I think on this, but I think that could in itself be a topic that we could come together for a cross-alliance focused discussion where we could go in more depth and discuss the exact methodologies, pedagogic methodologies that we are experimenting with, because I think there is a lot of space where we could share and learn from each other.
Thank you very much. I see we are running out of time because I know some of us have other meetings at 5 o'clock, so we really should stop. Is there anybody who has a message to share with our little group here? You can have, so to speak, the last word. Luciana, you want to say something?
Thank you all. Thank you very much for this conference.
Well, no, I have to thank you because you're the one who organized it with your team. And it was a pleasure sharing this, although it was my first time I'm sharing something at conference on an online way. So it's a bit of a learning process itself. But I think it was indeed very interesting. And as I said before, we are all struggling with inclusion, exclusion. We all take it very seriously. What I take away from this presentations is also that one, well, as I said before, that it's a researchable topic, so we have to take that seriously. But also, and this has not been discussed at length, that there is a kind of regulatory framework that is developed by the Commission, although it's not specifically mentioning higher education, but that could be used as a kind of framework for us, our endeavors as well. So that's also something we have to think about in the future. So with this, I would like to say goodbye to everybody, but not before thanking all the panelists. And I don't know what kind of etiquette there is for a kind of applause that you give to all the panelists. So maybe we just have to raise our hands or something like that and say bye-bye. And thank you very much. and hope to see you soon.
Yes. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Take
So
care.
much.
Bye.
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 Bye. Bye-bye.